welcome everyone to the feed talk of today. There's going to be Arthur Ouaknine presenting about his work in machine learning and forest monitoring. Arthur is a postdoc at Mila in Montreal, where we met and became friends. So thank you, Arthur, for accepting the invitation. And we're the floor is yours.
Measurement basically doesn't allow.
Arthur, you are muted, I think.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Great. Thank you very much. So I start again. Thanks for inviting me today for this feed talk. That's very nice. I'm very happy to present our work that we did at Mila and McGill today. So my name is Arthur Ouaknine. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at McGill University, at Mila, the Quebec AI Institute, and founded by IVADO. And today I'm going to present different bunch of works that we've been working on for the past few years on learning how to generalize across different modalities and scales, especially for forest application in remote sensing. So to briefly introduce myself, can you see my pointer, by the way, just to know? Maybe not, I don't know. All right.
Try to move
so, can you see something here, like my mouth or? Oh.
No, we can just see my mouse here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I try to not point anything then. Thank you. So yeah, a few words about me. So I did my PhD in France. I was working on autonomous driving, basically. I was working on computer vision with automotive radar. So I'm definitely not a specialist in remote sensing. But I was very interested in that. Basically, in my lab at Telecom Paris, I was in a remote sensing lab working on SAR, so had a bunch of intuition about it. And that's what also motivated me for my postdoc afterwards. And I then did my PhD in 2022, where I actually did a very long trip in South America. So I traveled during half a year. And I actually discovered a lot of things there, and I was very, very surprised and shocked by how biodiversity might be very fragile and impacted by humans, basically. So it really as well motivated me to continue my work on this topic, and so I started my postdoc in late 2022 at McGill and Mila, and I did a couple of things actually during my postdoc. So I was also a core team member at Climate Change AI, where I co-organized a bunch of workshops at NeurIPS and ICLR, for example. And I also co-founded a company called Rubisco AI that unfortunately no longer exists already, but it was a very interesting project that I'm going to talk briefly about. And I was also granted by IVADO for a grant for my research in forest monitoring. Right, so just a few words about biodiversity. So forest covers around 30% of grasslands, and it contains around 80% of terrestrial biodiversity. So it's a very important habitat and let's say ecosystem, because it provides food and habitats for both human and many living organisms. And we have to be careful about it. So one may say that climate change it could be one of the biggest challenges of our century, even though we are not very sure these days. Well, it might also be seen on only the tip of the iceberg, because biodiversity collapse that we are actually living right now may actually endanger human species faster than we think, since biodiversity is necessary for us to prosper on Earth. For example, thanks to pollination to generate food, but also like forests to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Basically, in between 1970 and 2020, we estimate that the global biodiversity has decreased by even around 73%. because of human impact and climate change. So we must be careful about this vicious circle that might actually accelerate climate change because of, for example, decreasing the tree population, as an example. But we want to stay positive, and we still believe there is hope, especially by reducing our impact and restoring biodiversity that could actually mitigate climate change and reduce impacts for future generations. And for example, like restoring properly forest might actually end up in absorbing more carbon from the atmosphere. So it could actually be a virtual cycle at some point. And by actually preserving and restoring carefully the biodiversity, we might end up in like having a better future, hopefully. And remote sensing offer a powerful toolbox for such objective because it has like a very broad overview of what we can see and monitor worldwide. So to briefly like introduce the motivation behind, I just wanted to highlight this work. So it's a canopy height map of Europe that has been presented, and it's actually an output of this work presented at ICML 25, where the authors, so Pauls and collaborators, have been working on a model to capture temporal dynamics of forests in this region. So they were using time series to predict as well time series of forests. So it's a very interesting work because they also try to evaluate like the dynamics to maybe find like some disturbance in forests that could have happened in 2019 and 2022, I think. So in the red circle that you can see on the top, I highlighted a part of the disturbance that they actually showcase. And it's very interesting because their model were actually capable of seeing a real disturbance that happened in 2019, between 2019 and 2021 in Germany, where there's been a loss of around 500,000 hectares of forest because of different impacts, such as like the severe droughts and beetle infestation. And it particularly impacted coniferous forest in central of Germany. And they actually lost around 5% of the total forest in Germany. So it has been a huge impact. And it has also an impact on the climate because when you lose so much forest, you actually emit a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. So it's a very interesting work in a sense where you can actually retrieve disturbance that actually happen. So it provides a lot of, let's say, hope to actually have impact and potentially predict a future event that could occur. So hopefully this will have motivate you on why forests might matter. And in this talk, I'm going to talk about different works that we've been working on satellite remote sensing in one part and drone remote sensing on the other part. So I try to actually show you a few questions that I was asking myself during when I was working on these different projects. And first of all, I wanted to talk about benchmark and foundation model in satellite remote sensing, and especially wanted to try to partially answer like how do we evaluate remote sensing foundation models nowadays. I will then talk about this specific topic, like does it actually matter and does it still matter to develop single modality methods in satellite remote sensing? And then we will switch up a bit in drone remote sensing, but to still have some hints about machine learning and computer vision in remote sensing. And can we actually learn like models to generalize well only with label data? And finally, if we can, how we can leverage vision foundation models that are very powerful these days on natural images, but they are still like this domain gap to try to tackle. So I will, of course, only partially answer this question, but hopefully give some hints for future discussion. But you might also end up with even more questions that I'm still asking myself every day. So let's start with this benchmarking and foundation model in remote sensing part. So as a brief introduction, this figure from DOFA paper, I find it very interesting and useful to basically summarize what a foundation model is. So it's a model that aims to be able to process any type of modality as input or a set of predefined modalities, let's say, and could potentially work well on a set of diverse tasks, let's say. So it's a very broad topic. I'm not going into too much details because I think you might be aware of it. But I found this other work that you have like the reference just below on the foundations of Earth foundation models in publishing Communication and Earth Environment 26. And this work is very interesting because they state a lot of current problems and also current future work where we might want to go. And what they stated in this work was interesting because this was statement we were interested in back in 2024. So we didn't solve them at all. And a few of them are still around this benchmarking thing. So they mentioned that certain regions are not represented in existing Earth observation benchmark. They also mentioned that foundation models currently face a challenge with the lack of standardized evaluation benchmarks. So it's still a problem in like this overall benchmarking thing. And as another one, there is still no consensus on how to adapt a pre-trained foundation model for a downstream task. So we might agree or not, but these are still like open topics apparently, and we try to actually talk about that in a work that we've been working on in 2024 and has been presented at AAAI 2025. So this work led by Nicolas Buntos was about building a huge benchmark on forest monitoring tasks for remote sensing. And we called it FOMObench. So it basically encompasses a different set of tasks, such as classification, segmentation, and detection. So back in the days, it wasn't that straightforward to include detection in such benchmark. And we also included a lot of different data sets to group them into this benchmark with different set of data of modality. And a specific one that we included was aerial and drone imagery. That was especially interesting for their high resolution. So in the set of resolution that you can see on this figure, you have like this very high resolution, meaning like inferior to 5 centimeters, which is as well not very common in remote sensing from benchmarks. So to complete a bit this benchmark, we also created our own data set that we call TALOS. It's based on a database called TALO, which was actually grouping field inventories of forests worldwide with around 500,000 samples. And so what we did is to basically group them and gather different modalities for remote sensing to perform these tasks that we define as a multi-classification task, where you basically have to predict the distribution of genus trees. And so you have more than 1,000 classes in this data set. You have around 1.7 thousand unique location, time series around 8 years, depending on the location and different modalities with Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, digital elevation model, and ERA5. So we designed this data set for this specific task as well to expand a bit the spatial distribution that we had to complete. So on the left, you have all the data set we included in this benchmark without this TALOS data set. And on the right, the one that we try to build up to actually like have a more representative spatial distribution, which is for sure not perfect, but we at least try to have a better representation. And what we came up with in this work as well was a baseline. We tried to build like a foundation model baseline in this work, trying to handle all of these different modalities and this different scale. So in this work, we defined a modality as being a different, let's say, spectral band and resolution. And so for, I'm just going to try to introduce a bit what we try to did here. And basically for each modality, so you will have a linear projection that is going to generate green embeddings that you can see on this figure here for each batch. So you're going to sample into all your different modalities. You're going to generate this green embedding, and you're going to have also a spectral embedding corresponding to its spectral position. It was actually not very straightforward back in the days. And we also included a positional embedding for each one of these embeddings. So you basically do an element-wise sum there, and you end up having your batch. And then you train your model with a basic mask autoencoder framework, where you try to reconstruct a masked token. Sorry. What we try to propose in this work is to also include a batch gradient accumulation step at the end, where you're going to, as I mentioned just earlier, you're going to sample randomly through your modalities. So you're going to accumulate gradients through different modalities. And well, then at some point you compute your loss and you back propagate the error through the model and the linear projections. The overall idea here is to basically smooth the learning process, because when you have very different modalities and especially very different scales and resolution, you might end up having like a very stochastic training scheme. So yeah, that was basically the overall aim of the baseline here. So a few takeaways about this work was, first of all, that this FOMO-net baseline was actually working pretty well, or decently well, let's say, on classification tasks, including multi-classification and semantic segmentation. However, it was very difficult to adapt it to detection, and I still believe it's an open question here, because pre-trained VITs fundamentally do not have like when you pre-train them with SSL, do not have the same features as that you can have in an object detector, and as well, how do you like set up the heads to perform the detection? I still believe it remains very challenging these days. An interesting takeaway that we've noticed in this work is that we try when you try to tokenize like the modalities here, we try to have either a single linear projection for each modality or a single linear projection for everything. And actually having a single linear projection for all modalities was performing the best by a large margin. So it was quite surprising, but it was an interesting outcome of this work. And at the end of the day, we found out that the supervised methods that we included in this work as baselines of all the benchmarks were very very strong performance. Because they were potentially like state of the art in their task on natural imagery. So I'm going to just briefly talk about this last part, and especially on how do we actually evaluate remote sensing foundation models these days. So a lot of people are using the Pangea benchmark that you might be all aware of. So I'm not going to introduce it too much in depth, but like in two recent papers, Raman and Thor, so two recent foundation models, they'll also use this benchmark. So on the left, either with 100% of the training set, or on the right with 10%. So you have this huge table like summarizing different like methods that are, and I'm not going to ask you to go into in depth of these numbers, but I'm going to highlight these very interesting parts that are like the baseline, the supervised baseline that we like to showcase, that are basically a UNet and a VIT. So UNet model released 2015, VIT 2017. And what I'm asking myself, still today is that, are we doing fair comparison? Because like these are very old school methods, and maybe we could use state of the art methods. It's just like some thought, but yeah, there are many other ways of evaluating that. And one may say that foundation models are actually very good at low data regime, but on the right, you can see that these baselines are still very competitive, whereas we can actually use like very adapted methods in low data regime to actually even compete more against this foundation model. So still open question, and I would like to transition through the next step with this very interesting graph, I think. So still in the work I mentioned before, where you have on the left like the amount of Earth observation and climate data that is estimated to be released in currently and in the future, and on the right the label sets that are expected to be released. So you will notice that it's not exactly the same scale, right? It's in petabyte, but not exactly the same. What's interesting here is that we still, and they still believe that it's going to have like more and more labeled data sets that are going to be released. And still today, there is still a huge amount of labeled data that could actually be leveraged, and that may be useful to understand some properties or design methods potentially. So what I'm going to talk right now is about like actually using this label in within a single modality setting, where you just have like one modality and associated labels. So in this use case, I'm going to present a work led by Aya Sharif that has been presented at NeurIPS 25 in the dataset and benchmark track. And in this work, we're trying to explore vegetation trace prediction with hyperspectral measurements. So basically, hyperspectral measurements in this case is a one-dimensional signal with a lot of wavelengths. And in this in this work, especially, we are considering only a single pixel. So basically, we are focalizing really on the spectral dimension. And this have like it's very like motivated by this work, because what we try to predict, so the vegetation traits, are like chemical components of vegetation, such as leaf area index, chlorophyll content, but also like carbon-based constituents that have very, very important application in agriculture or in vegetation health assessment. So in this work, the idea is to predict 8 traits, and it's like a multi-regression task that has the particularity of that all the traits are correlated in between each other, and they are also correlated with different spectral bands of the input. So what we try to do is to train some models. So we come up with a new data set I'm just going to present afterwards, and try to explore semi-supervised and self-supervised learning methods to perform this downstream task. So we came up with this green hyperspectra, so a huge unlabeled multi-source hyperspectral data set. So on the left, you can see a very the different set of spectra that we can have in this data set, because they have been collected by spaceborne, airborne, or proximal data. So proximal meaning like you have like an hyperspectral camera with your hand and you're actually measuring the spectra on the ground. So in blue on the right, you can see the spatial distribution of our data sets. And that we try to actually come up with a very different spatial distribution worldwide. And in purple, the purple points belongs to the annotated sample. So it's an already existing work. This annotated data set was basically a related work where everyone tries to gather all measurement that existed. And you will see that there is a strong bias into North America and Europe. And the main purpose of that, because it's very, very expensive to gather this annotation, because you have to analyze sample in labs, basically. Right, so you have this huge diversity, and we actually try to gather all of these data first to have a better representation of the world. So meaning that in the future, if you have like other type of labels that are annotated somewhere else, you can perform still well, but also to have a very diverse set of data and trying to generalize better. So we try to come up with different methods to stress test this use case. I'm going just to present 2 of them. So the first one was based on radiative transfer model. So we call it, it's a RTM autoencoder, where basically we leverage radiative transfer model. So it's a model that is going to generate a spectra from bio traits. So from the different traits that we are actually trying to predict there. Basically, it's going from this trait, trying to simulate like the physics behind, to like simulate the reflectance of leaves or canopy to regenerate a spectrum. So what we did in this work is that basically you have an encoder, and you have a latent space, and this latent space is going to feed your radiative transfer model to generate the generated spectra. You have a few layers here to basically adapt what the output of the physical model to a real spectra. And as a note, this is not it's differentiable, but there is no learnable parameter here. So basically, you have a reconstruction loss, right, as a basic autoencoder in between the input and output, but also you have a supervised with your spectra within the latent space. So you enforce the latent space to be your to actually perform the downstream task. So this is a semi-supervised method. Actually, you try to leverage a lot of unsupervised data as well as labeled data. And the other method we consider, is for sure a mask autoencoder, a one-dimensional one, where you basically try to mask some tokens, right, that belongs to different spectral bands, and you try to reconstruct your spectra. So and for sure, like how does it happen for the downstream task to fine-tune your encoder with a supervised loss, very classic. So in both cases, we actually end up with some adjustment in the loss to reconstruct better this type of spectra, with especially like, so you have the MSC for sure loss, but you also have like a cosine loss to better adjust to the different shapes of the spectra. And some interesting results we came up to. So here you have like the results in low data regime, meaning that you're going to artificially reduce the number of label samples that you have in your training set for the downstream task. So in the average over traits graph, the last one, it's basically the average over all the traits, but you have all the traits as well. You can notice that the green line represents what we call the supervised baseline, which was previously the state of the art of this field, which consists of an efficient net specialized in one-dimensional signal. And basically what you can see here with the purple line is the mask autoencoders that is fine-tuned on the downstream task. And that was very interesting to see that we actually ended up having very good performance on low data regime. So definitely better than the baseline, but also outperforming the baseline even with 100% of the labels. And I must note here that it's actually super interesting to have such results here because the labels are extremely expensive to gather. So another interesting results we got here. So huge table once again. Sorry about that. It's about half-range spectra. So you have an example on the bottom where at some point in some real-world use case you have some sensors that are going to actually record only half of the spectra. And what it was interesting to actually see this, evaluate on this use case because it's a real world use case. And without any doubt, actually the mask autoencoder performed really well on this task. Why? So the mask autoencoder was pre-trained on the full spectra with a large data set basically, and then you fine-tune it on half of the spectra. The thing is that with this SSL pre-training scheme, you actually leverage to have masked part of the spectra. So without, we were not targeting especially this downstream task afterwards, but it actually was already robust to such use case. So it was a very good result. All right, so a few takeaways from this work, I would say, is that we still think that there are some single modality tasks that remain still underexplored, especially because they require costly labels, and they might bring on the table very interesting questions, such as I presented here. So I still believe there are some work to do here, and that may be helpful to design more complex methods. So in this particular use case, like self-supervised learning with hyperspectral data leads to actually state-of-the-art results on a multi-regression task. So it was an interesting outcome of this work as well. And it has very interesting generalization capacities, especially on the half-range spectra that I just mentioned there. So I'm going to switch a bit off topic, but with this introduction of this very cool work that has been done in 2021, where you have in Italy, there are two examples of one Prisma, so hyperspectral measurements with this time the spatial resolution, and Sentinel-2. And basically what's interesting is that hyperspectral imagery or data will provide you very interesting and very high resolution in the spectral dimension, providing you information about vegetation, about the water, for example. But the thing is that, for example, Sentinel-2 has actually a better spatial resolution. So the spatial resolution can actually be very useful in some use case, especially in forests. And here I'm going to switch from this hyperspectral data with no spatial resolution and a very high spectral resolution with something completely different. Only RGB, but very high spatial resolution, which is drone remote sensing. And to do this kind of transition, I'm going to talk about a project or a challenge we participated to. So the X-Prize Rainforest competition was a 5 years competition that happened. The last step was in 2025. It was a 5 years competition with a $10 million prize at the end. And the overall idea was that you have 5 years to prepare your work, and then you're dropped in a 100-hectare plot in a tropical rainforest in Brazil. You have 24 hours to acquire data, 48 hours to write a report, and very important restriction, you cannot enter in this 100-hectare plot. So basically, you might think that remote sensing might be important as well as robotics tools there. So as I mentioned, it was very far away in a very remote area, and remote sensing was very useful in this location. That being said, so in our case, we've been contacted to join like the final stage of the competition with the Limelight team for our expertise on drone imagery, because in this use case, like Sentinel-2 or other type of satellite products were not that meaningful because we needed very fine-grained remote sensing data. And at the end of the day, so we actually won this competition. That was a very cool outcome of our work. So what we did in our case was to provide this cartography of individual trees where you delineate each individual trees, and you can actually zoom in for each tree, having like zoom pictures to distinguish like flowers, etc. So of course, we didn't win this competition because of this map, but with a huge team that performed like very well on a lot of different tasks, such as collecting eDNA in this location, etc. So I'm going to mention actually how we ended up building this type of outcome by trying to question once again something that might not be straightforward these days. Can we actually generalize well with only labeled data? And it's actually very important in forest monitoring because we actually need individual tree trait characterization and cartography. And it starts by actually localizing each individual trees. And one of the challenge is the scale, as well as the data and the labels for sure. So how can you actually do that in like unseen area, for example, when you pre-train your model? So we started first of all with this work, so led by Hugo Bochon, that is going to be presented at ICLR 26 quite soon. And we came up with this new data set called SalvaBox. So it's a data set which aims to do tree crown detection that spans over 3 tropical regions in Panama, Brazil, and Ecuador. And still today, it's like the biggest tropical forest data set that encompasses 10 more annotation at higher resolution that ever exists before. And so what we first tried to do with this work is to try to do some ablation study and try to better understand what's going on with like these models and what will be the best like resolution and input size, for example. So we first tried to stress test like some models such as a CNN, and we evaluated different GSD, so ground sampling distance. This is basically the resolution that you will have in centimeter on your image. And you have the different input size, so we try to vary the input size as well, basically the image that you take as input of your model. So we tried this fast CNN with ResNet or a Dino. So Dino is a transformer method for object detection with a CNN backbone, or a Dino still with SwinL, so a fully VIT transformer model for detection. So the conclusion might be straightforward, but very interesting, we think. So the higher the resolution and the better. So, and the higher the input size, the better. And I think the last one, it was very counterintuitive for us, because when you end up having very huge input image, you have a lot of objects as well. So it complexifies a lot the scene. It wasn't straightforward that it's going to generalize well and actually perform well at the end, but it was the case. And so what the overall goal was afterwards is to try to train a model to generalize well by mixing data set together, to try to leverage all the annotated set we could find. So it actually brings up another problem where you have different set of data that have different resolution and imagery quality as well. But the resolution was a core problem actually here. And we just come up like with this idea that we did not introduce, that has been, I think, introduced by Scalemy back in the days, where you do some crop and resize to actually perform like a data augmentation that is going to be very interesting. I will get back to that afterwards. So how does it work? Basically, you have a huge tile. You're going to crop it into it. So in yellow here, you have a small crop, and you're going to resize it to another scale. So in the yellow example, you end up having a very high resolution because you have a few meters on the ground. And so it means like a small spatial extent, basically. And you have a few number of trees. It's a very specific use case. And in another use case, like in the blue here, you have a very huge crop So it might be useful to take into account huge objects such as these very big trees, and you have also a way bigger number of trees there. But at the end, when you resize, you then sample the resolution. So you have a coarser resolution, but still a very large spatial extent. So at the end of the day, it's going to smooth the different data sets together, and it's very helpful to actually mix data sets for the pre-training, for the training. So we try to evaluate that on different. So we actually mixed 4 data sets that are going to be noted here with later, including ours, self-supervised, and we evaluated the model with different mix of data sets on tropical forests. So once again, big table, you have the self-supervised here, our data set, and another one called BCI 50 hectares, which is completely out of distribution for all the model we're evaluating here. So this is the column here. OD means out of distribution, means that it has never been seen before in training. So I'm just going to ask you to focus very briefly on the first row, which is detect tree 2. It's a method that has been designed to be a generalist tree crown detector. So it's supposed to perform very well, and this is like the state of the art to actually beat. So first of all, we trained this swing, Dino Swing L with like the optimal parameter using only our data set. And this is basically the best performing methods on tropical forests worldwide. So super interesting results. And we try to also like train the same model, but by mixing a lot of data set. And we have competitive results with ourselves, but still like not the best, which is like understandable since we are like not specialized. It's going to be like very generalist, but not very specialized in tropical forests. So we end up trying to analyze that for temperate forest as well, not going too much in details, but at the end of the day, mixing all the data set gave us very good performance overall. And it actually is like a very robust method now for tree crown detection. And what an interesting outcome as well is that if you pre-train these models only on all data set in the tropics, you still outperform the former state of the art on 2 out of distribution temperate forests. So interesting outcomes that actually showcase the interest of the data set itself. So a few takeaways from this work is that it was interesting to actually leverage a lot of data set that have different type of annotation and data quality with this multi-scale approach to end up with a generalized tree crown detection that is working very well. And interestingly, with this data augmentation, we ended up having it working with theoretically, artificially, up to 20 centimeter resolution, but we never tried that on a given imagery. So that would be a very interesting work just to try. And there is still this conclusion I just talked about the resolution. So high resolution matter and input size matter as well. So all the code is available on this repository that you can see on the paper as well. Feel free to use them. It's a very good work that has been done by Hugo. It's very easy to use. And it's actually not enough for tree crown, tree assessment. So we actually need the segmentation, like properly instant segmentation of each tree, and not only object detection. So why do we care about this task actually? It's because if you have, with this type of output, you can actually estimate the biomass with high precision. And it's very important in many downstream applications, but even just to quantify the biomass of forests worldwide. So what you need to do is to first locate each individual tree. You want to segment each one of these tree crowns, and you want to classify them at the species level. And if you have all of these 3 information, or at least like the segmentation and the class, you can leverage what we call allometric equation to deduce the biomass of each individual trees. So I'm not going too much in the details of this allometric equation, but feel free to ask me any question about that. And the overall idea of this last part of the talk is to try to see if we can leverage vision foundation models that are pre-trained on natural images for these downstream tasks. So I'm going to really briefly introduce SAM, Segment Anything. So it's been a model released by Meta in 2023 that aims to, so in the first version, I'm going very high level there. You have a VIT that is going to encode your model, and you have a prompt that is going to go into an encoder, and basically both of them are going to feed a decoder that is going to generate you a mask. So it's a very interesting work because you can like basically prompt with random points and get some very precise segmentation, or you can give like precise point annotation and get some segmentation afterwards. So it's a actually very powerful tool, especially because you can provide different type of prompts, such as bounding box. So we are going to be very interested in that. And because it's very generalist, it performs very well on zero shot. And this is actually what we try to do. It's like now that we have this generalist tree-crown detector, can we actually just prompt SAM and end up having good instant segmentation work? So the answer is actually yes. And I'm going to show you like a demo of what I built with a collaborator. So we try to actually build this platform that is called Rubisco AI, where you can actually drag and drop some drone imagery. And the idea is that you can run our algorithm that are hosted on AWS for detection, segmentation, but like for the segmentation, it's this pipeline. So the huge models for detection and SAM. So I found this orthomosaic close to Roma, actually, not that far, close to a very big lake that is natural forest with a very, I must admit, very bad quality imagery. So it works as it is, but it's a very interesting forest. And I run the algorithm in it because you also have like some plantation there. And so we predicted around 44,000 trees there. So you can see that here, it works decently well on the plantation. And even on the core forest, you can pretty well detect most of the trees. So for sure, I cannot assess the performance overall because I do not have any annotation through that, but it actually works pretty well at scale. So it's working well, as this pipeline is actually also available in this repository. So feel free to have a look. And a few takeaways from this frozen pipeline. So nothing is trained here in the demo I've shown you is purely zero shot. It's a very generalist approach, but thanks to the vision foundation model, like it's been pre-trained on natural imagery, but still working pretty well. One of the problems we can get here is that you're going to propagate the error. So if you're missing a tree first, you're not going to segment it afterwards. And I think major problem here is that you cannot predict the class. That is one of the major problems, especially to estimate biomass. So what we came up with in this final work is to try to have a model that is going to perform instant segmentation at the end, which is the final downstream task that we want to do. So this method has been, the project has been led by Melissa Teng and presented at NeurIPS 25, and it basically aims at leveraging SAM. So we've been very interested in plantations because it's a use case that is very important for restoration project, and especially because we had some interesting data set with very high resolution imagery. So here it's millimeter resolution, but also we wanted to leverage additional modalities. So in the right part here, you can see this is a digital elevation model. So it's a product that is generated by photogrammetry, and that is a relative height from the bottom of pixel to each one of the pixels of the imagery. And in this data set, you also have instant segmentation annotation, so tree crown segmentation with the class as well. So first of all, we tried a very basic approach. Let's say you have your frozen SAM here, and you try to leverage the DSM to get some prompt, some point prompt. So you take, for example, the local maxima of the height of your trees, and you feed that at SAM as a point prompt. So of course, it works better than the automatic mode that I just showed in the video, because you actually locate a bit where are the trees. But it's not performing well, and you do not have the class. So we still have the same problem that before. We came up with like additional baselines such as masker CNN, which is very well known, used and like used a lot, in the field, which provides very strong actually result there. Also faster CNN plus SAM because it's like really related to the work I presented before. You only need the boxes as well. So it's very interesting to have this baseline around. And we also, so an interesting experiment was to try to prompt SAM with masks. So with the output of masker CNN. And in the qualitative results, you can see on the right that if you do that, you're going to actually introduce artifacts in the segmentation of SAM that is going to try to refine the segmentation too much. So it's not going to be very informative, actually. As a competing method, which we evaluated quite a lot, RS prompter. So it's a word that has been introduced in 2023, and a very interesting word because basically the encoder and decoder of SAM are frozen. But you have a prompt encoder. So basically you learn how to prompt SAM. You take the embedding, you have kind of a faster CNN way. Basically you have region of interest that are going to generate additional embeddings that you're going to feed SAM decoder for. And we build up on top of this framework to create Balsam. So Balsam aims to have embeddings of the DSM that you're going to concatenate within the latent space of the image encoder of SAM. And then you still learn your prompt with the RS prompter framework, but the SAM decoder will need to adapt to both embeddings of the image as well as from the DSM. It was very interesting because we ended up having the best performance overall on plantations, especially thanks to this new modality. And yeah, it was a very interesting work as well, like to be able to leverage this vision foundation model. And like another output of that is that using this DSM was improving prediction overall. And why may not that it's a free modality. When you're doing photogrammetry for drone, this modality is always generated. So definitely worth it to be used. So a few takeaways from this work is that it's actually a very difficult task. Like the DSM did not help too much. We evaluated that on 3 data sets. Learning prompts always reach the best performance. So definitely a very good insight to get in mind for SAM-based methods. And there are still some limits because the annotation are very costly, especially with this instant segmentation task. And you still need like 1 model per region. So can be very expensive as well. Okay, so I'm going to conclude a bit over time, but with a few takeaways that I think from this presentation. So methods are developed faster than evaluation frameworks. And I think they need to keep up the pace. So it's still something that we need to keep that in mind. As I've shown, like maybe unimodal methods and downstream tasks may motivate the development of more complex methods by better understanding like how in which use case some modalities can be useful and how which type of SSN method you can use, but also in the labels that you want to leverage. Maybe they can carry some meaningful information. And also labels and vision foundation models are useful for improving generalization across scales and different modalities. So I still believe that there are very meaningful information in labels that could be leveraged for pre-training as well, or to generalize. And VFMs must be like adapted actually. And we still have ongoing work on these topics. Happy to answer any question on that. But it's a very good starting point for that. And a final note I would like to bring on the table here is that there is still like a huge gap in between satellite and drone remote sensing, even though I think both could benefit from each other. And we also have like very good ideas and ongoing work on this topic. So I would like to thank all my collaborators at Mila, at McGill, UDM, Polytechnique Montreal that collaborate in all of this work and ongoing work as well. And as a final note, I would just like to note that there are fundamental machine learning problems and meaningful remote sensing application for biodiversity and understanding and conservation. So if today there are like young researchers that are asking themselves what to do, please like have a look into this research perspective. It's very meaningful and a lot to do. And if you're a senior PI, like if you're interested in this work, I'm actually looking for a permanent position in Europe right now. So feel free to reach me out because I'm planning to expand this work quite a lot. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any question.
So thank you so much, Arthur. And I'm sure that Ruben has some question, maybe for people in presence and for people online. Please raise your hand or write in the chat, and we have some minutes for questions.
Yes, thank you, Arthur, for the interesting talk. There's a lot of stuff to process.
Yes, sir. a bit dense.
No, for sure. Thank you, Cristiano, also for giving us the opportunity for questions. I think Gabriele in the online had a question. Can you check? Yeah, can you hear us, Gabriele? Seems that now you're muted, I think. Okay. It's not working. You can also put the question in the chat if you want. In the meantime, maybe someone has a question here.
I have a question.
Okay.
About Pangea. So, if you can, after thanks for the talk, can you go back to the slide about Pangea?
Can you hear Valerio, Arthur?
Very slightly. No, which slide? Sorry, can you repeat?
Hello. Can you get back to the slide about Pangea, please?
Oh yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, sure.
Probably you see it coming up, but I have to.
Sorry, it's very early in the. Oh, I was around there. This one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you let's say expand about what you mean with are we doing fair comparison? Because if I got it right, you were meaning that okay, UNet is kind of small and it's kind of old, but if this is working the best, what would you? How would you change the comparison to make it fairer? Let's say.
I would say that, so what triggers me a bit, and not especially in these two papers, right, in general, is that we try to reach this performance as the SOTA, let's say. Whereas I believe that if you try each one of these individual methods with like one other method, and for example, if you have like semantic segmentation method and you try mass2former, it's going to be a very different output and very different type of performance. So I believe that what we think is the upper bound is actually not the upper bound, because like computer vision is moving fast. And especially in segmentation and classification, we have very strong models that are definitely performing better than these two. And also there is this low data regime thing where there are plenty of work on few-shot learning, one-shot learning, for example, in computer vision that could be actually leveraged for a better framework. Or I'm not saying that it's a bad framework. I'm saying that it could be actually improved. So we do not claim all the time that we are reaching supervised performance, whereas it could be actually better. I'm not sure if it answered the question. Sorry.
Yeah, it really answered, but of course the idea of the benchmark was to use a model in which you don't have to use a specialized model, let's say because the idea, of course, to use a just partial foundation model is just to use the same model without specializing it on the downstream task and whatever, and use the same across different tasks. So for this, the most straightforward for the tasks that we selected, like change detection, semantic segmentation, regression, and so on, was just to use the most widespread one that was UNet. And still, it looks like UNet is kind of one of the best. So, I mean, I see your point, but of course, the goal was slightly different in the regional paper. But thanks for.
At some point, you need the labels, right, to fine-tune your model.
Yeah, still, it's more about the model. So if the model, you know that mass-former, for example, is the best for segmentation, of course you can go with it, but the idea is that you want to use the very same model to solve different tasks, because that's the idea, let's say, to have a comparison with just partial foundation model that's supposed to be used across tasks. That was the idea.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, okay. I mean, UNet can also do like all of these as well. I mean, it's a very long topic. I would like to, I would be very interested in discussing that offline, by the way. So yeah.
Yeah.
But thanks for the feedback. That's very interesting.
Thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Does someone here have a question? Or Gabriele, did you have time to put your question in the chat, or do you want to try to enable your microphone? Okay. No. Gabriel?
Yes. Thank you, Ruben. Maybe I do have a question, actually. Arthur, thank you very much for your presentation. It was actually very interesting for me because I'm also working with forestry here at the FE Lab, although in a slightly different topic somehow. But I got very interested in this benchmark data set that you're talking about, the tallow, right? So can you maybe give us some more information about what are the parameters that you have in this data set and if they are available all over the world in terms of forest, plant species, and other kind of information that are not only allometric in these terms, just to understand, I mean, how useful could be this data set for some of the applications that we are willing to implement in our next model.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for reading that. Maybe it wasn't very clear. So what we did basically was to gather labels from the tallow data database. So in this database, you have it groups a lot of measurements from the field, from forests. So you do not. It's a bit scarce in a sense where you do not have like all the trees that will belong in your imagery. Just have a few plots, and these plots might have like annotate, well, they can carry a lot of different information at the species level, genus, family, or like even sometimes biomass. So we try to find the balance, the trade-off in between what you can get as a label and what we get there is to actually get the genus level annotation. So for each one of these of the trees that are going to be annotation there, you will have the genus label, the genus taxa level.
Okay.
And what we did is that the task by itself is more formulated as a multi-classification task. So you're going to predict the presence or absence of a given genus for a given location. So for this, for example, multispectral area.
Okay.
So
Yeah, thank you. For basically, I try to look up here, so it's not the same data set that I can see, for instance, in the Earth Engine, or is it the same one that I'm looking into it here right now? Or you're not sure? Because what I have here are just points, and for each point I have features here with what I believe is the individual specifications of the trees that we're looking, right?
Right.
So they're not exhaustive, or they are, in fact, in terms of the trees that were mapped. I mean, can you?
So are you talking about like what we used to build the data set? So this, I was talking mostly about the annotation, but the Talos data set itself like carries some imagery as well. So are you talking about our data set or the former one with only the points?
I only the points here. So you derived the data set from the points. Is that so? I try to understand the difference
on this as annotation. Yeah, sorry, it wasn't maybe very clear. And we try on all of this area to try to gather, remote sensing modalities. So you can actually predict these, let's say, points in a sense. The points are made to like try to predict a distribution basically. But yeah, as input, you have like you have imagery, so Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, DEM, and ERA5. That might be useful, as well as time series.
Okay, and another question, I think close to the slide 35, you were talking about segmenting, the segmentation of individual crowns of trees, right? When you were talking about biomass in the Amazon,
yes.
Biomass, high precision. Yeah, so one of the problems that we have when trying to estimate biomass in the Amazon forest specifically is that we have multiple layers of forest there. So mapping tree crowns and individuals that we can actually see from above only tells a part of the story, right? And also the species are very important because, as of course you know, the allometric equations that you have there most of the time at least family specific, right? So
right.
Did you manage to, I mean, from the crown species that, from the crown metrics that you have, did you actually manage to also predict the families that we have present in these areas, or you stay with the segmentations of the crowns?
Yes, so very interesting question. So first of all, I would like to state that so especially in the tropics, 1% of the biggest trees, so the biggest trees that you can actually see from the top, are storing 50% of the total above ground biomass of tropical forest. So it's definitely, it matters a lot to do that on the upper above by seeing like the canopies. And if you take only the upper canopies that you can see from remote sensing, it's around, I think, 80% of the biomass. So it's still very important. And in one of the works, so in this work, especially that we presented at NeurIPS, so you have this end-to-end pipeline where you do instant segmentation. So you also have the class as well. And I'm going to, sorry, I have some backup slides somewhere. Where is it? Here, right? So you have on this last row, what we call the BCI dataset. So it's an area in Panama, in the tropical forests, where you have actually tree-crown segmentation annotation at the species level. Whereas, so it's a very good benchmark to test models. Whereas I would say that in our work, we stay at the family level because the long tail distribution was too difficult to handle it with like the model we try to learn. So I believe that this type of framework are going to, this type of data set are very important to try to leverage these methods. And we're going to, in the near future, publish a new data set as well in Brazil and Panama for species identification. So it might be useful for you, hopefully, in the future.
Yes, yes. And just, are you planning to work with the biomass data set somehow? Or you're not working with this level of spatial resolution? Because you're working with very high spatial resolution, right?
So are you talking about the biomaster dataset, maybe?
No, the biomass satellite, the new.
Oh, sorry, the biomass satellite. Yeah, so yeah, of course, I'm looking forward having this data. I actually tried to gather some samples for this presentation, but the recordings were not yet available for the location we're trying to analyze. So yeah, definitely I'm thinking about using that, especially because you can potentially get like some information about the trunk size that is way more that is actually precise and could help to estimate the biomass for sure. So yeah, it's in our, I don't know if are you working with that already?
I will. I'm working with the CCI, and now we're starting to look into the biomass data set from our side, actually. But not, we don't have anything done, actually. I mean, one of the main challenges would be to work with the spatial resolution. I mean, it's really good for global measurements, but we are talking about a spatial resolution of 250 meters, right? So there's some limitations that I would like to, we still don't have other ways to validate the biomass other than in situ measurements, right? So LiDAR information from above and from looking upwards, actually. So we can have a full 3D characterization of the area, right? Because this is one of the tomographic most features that we want to see in the biomass, but it's really hard to actually validate. So this kind of benchmarkings would be great to see how they correlate with the tomographic images that we are going to have, actually.
I totally agree, and I think this is a current bottleneck, is about like how you do evaluate biomass estimation. That's why we are doing a lot of proxies, as you have seen in this work, and a lot of data sets are coming these days, like on LiDAR. So hopefully we might use this, you know, located UAV LiDAR as ground truth, maybe to validate like huge maps. But yeah, totally agree, and I'm definitely interested in this type of work. So let's keep in touch. That would be useful.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That will be all.
I have one small follow-up question. Arthur, since we're starting to work on a model to process different SAR frequencies or different SAR data from different SAR sources with different frequencies, and do you see any promising application for that specific to forest? Well, of course, the biomass data is an obvious example because it's specifically made or designed for that purpose, but also for different SAR frequencies. I don't know, maybe some of these are already included in these benchmarks that you showed, but also more generally speaking, do you think these radar frequencies have something especially like have some particular potential for monitoring forest beside maybe the biomass issue?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a very good question. I think it's first I would like to say like for the SAR data, it's especially important for forest because so it's not directly related to the measurements, but as it can go through the clouds, it's super useful in the tropics because in the rainy season you have a lot of clouds all the time. So by using like Sentinel-2, for example, you're blocked in most of the problems. So it's in this sense it's super useful. Whereas for the spectral information by itself, I must admit that I'm not specialized in SAR. So you might ask this exact same question to Emanuele Dalsasso that is going to present his work, I think, in a couple of weeks. As a FI talk, he might be like have better relevant answer, I would say, to this question.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you very much.
Maybe to add into that, Ruben, but this is something that we can follow afterwards. One of the applications that I didn't think about it would be actually the species distribution that we have for individuals, because given a certain area, we don't have to map every individual in of course resolution to have an estimation of the species distribution that we have in there. And what we were lacking is actually a benchmarking data set that we can compare with. So that might be one of the next ones that we can consider that we didn't actually.
Yeah, all right. Very you can stay in touch for this Talos data set then. It might be useful.
Yeah, that would be very, very useful, I think.
Cool.
Okay, so unless anyone else has a last question, I think we can more or less wrap up. I want to thank you again, Arthur, for the super interesting talk.
Thank you for inviting me.
And yeah, let's stay in touch. So about these potential points of contact. And yeah, thank you everyone online for attending. And the recording will, I think, right, Cristiano, the recording will be made available on YouTube soon.
Yeah, will be available. Take into account maybe 1 week, 10 days time to pre-process it, and we'll be there.
Great. So thank you everyone. Thank you Arthur. Thank you Cristiano. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks Ruben for
attending.
Bye everyone.
Bye bye.